I wonder, when was the last time you were shocked by something that Jesus said? There's a real danger, isn't there, especially for those of us that have been around Christian things for a long time, to actually think that Jesus' teaching is pretty straightforward. Occasionally challenging, but okay, we can understand it. And so therefore everything is wonderfully clear and we have no difficulties. But it's also true, I think, that sometimes things he says leave you scratching your head and wondering, is he really saying what I think he is? And that's certainly true of this first parable here, because it seems on first reading as if he's recommending dishonesty. The manager is all about protecting himself at his employer's expense, and yet Jesus seems to say, well, look at him, learn from him. He's a good example for us. Interesting. Now, children, hopefully you've got sheets and so on, you know what's going on. I better get rid of this £20 note. Look after that for me, James, will you? Don't lose it. Don't lose it. Okay, fine. Right, okay. So, children, we love having you here. We really do. And we have Hope Kids for you, and we have Seeds of Truth, and we try and make things clear and straightforward for you. But this is the important thing, you kids, I really want you to get. Sometimes, and particularly as you get older, you're going to see that what the Bible teaches can be hard to understand. And it's important you realize that. Just because we try and make it simple and break it down for you, and we should, as adults, doesn't mean there are things that you're going to come across, you go, I don't get that. That doesn't make sense. When you encounter that, when that happens to you, that's a good thing. Let me just put up another slide for you, please. Does anyone know what that word means? To comprehend something means to understand it. There's a clue. So if something is incomprehensible, have a guess. It might be... Go on, Ben. Yeah, very good. Ununderstandable. Like that. We'll put that in the lectionary. Very good. Ununderstandable. It's hard to understand. And God is like that. There are certain things we can work out about him, because he tells us that. But there are huge things we don't know. And sometimes in the Bible we meet things and we go, what's God doing there? I don't understand what he's about. In fact, I don't understand him. And that's a really important lesson for the Christian life. The sooner we learn that, the more mature we'll be. So, as usual, kids, enjoy your sheets and listen out for times when God may be speaking to you, because there'll be something he has for you this morning. You're not here by accident. None of us are. God has intended for us to be here this morning. So he will have something for you to listen to. So, here we go. 2 headings. First of all, a parable that's hard to understand. Verses 1 to 8. Let me just very quickly say something before I dive in. You'll notice that the NIV has paragraphs here, and that verse 8 seems to lead straight into verse 9 and so on. I'm wanting to suggest to you that the break is at verse 8. I'll show that to you. And that the next parable begins with verse 9. Okay, remember that when this was written, there were no paragraphs, there were no verses, there were no chapters. It's one long piece of text. So the paragraphs have been broken up to try and make it straightforward to us. And I'm suggesting that maybe this isn't quite on it, but we'll get there. So just to say that as we dive in. So here we go. A parable that's hard to understand. Notice who Jesus is speaking to, verse 1 of chapter 16. He's speaking to his followers, his disciples. And the story is pretty straightforward in one sense. There's an estate manager who's found abusing, the literal word is scattered. He's scattering his master's possessions, and word has reached the master. He's heard about it. So the wealthy landowner then confronts the manager, and it's clear for the manager that his number's up. So then the manager summons various tenants and gets them to reduce their bills by large amounts. 50% in the case of the olive oil, verse 6, and 20% in the case of the wheat, verse 7. And that's no small thing. given that the amount of oil involved was equivalent to 3 years' wages, while the wheat added up to around 8 years' wages. At this point, we may conclude not only that the estate manager is being dodgy, but the tenant farmers, for that's what they are, these tenants he's dealing with, would have been in on the act, so to speak, as they also are on the take. But not necessarily. See how the estate manager works out that he has to take action. It's his only way of securing his future. He has a eureka moment in verse 4. I got it! See how he acts speedily. That's important. Why? Hasn't he just lost his job? What's the point? Well, not quite. He hasn't lost his job just yet. He's got to hand over the account books to the owner, and thus his dismissal is not yet complete and probably not yet public. That means that the tenants will probably not know that he's about to lose his job. And so the estate manager comes along and says, reduce your bills. And they say, thank you very much. But notice what he says in verse 6. Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 1,500. Speed is of the essence of this story. Then comes the killer sentence in verse 8a. The master commended the dishonest manager. Notice he is dishonest. He says it. He's the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. And as if that's not tricky enough, Jesus himself then says, second part of verse 8, for the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light. In other words, Jesus says to his followers, look at this story, look at this man, and learn from him. So what's going on? Well, 3 things may help us, I think, to try and get to the bottom of what's going on here. First of all, the parable in detail. Let's have a closer look. Firstly, there's the rich master. We see that he's involved with his property and he will carry out judgment on the dishonest manager. He's going to dismiss him. But we also see he's surprisingly restrained. He could have had him clapped in irons and put in prison straight away. But he doesn't. And that fact gives the estate manager the space to act. Then what about the corrupt manager? Here we see that when confronted with his guilt, what he doesn't do is defend himself or make excuses. He knows he's been found out and his game's up, and he doesn't try and pretend otherwise. And whilst there's no indication that the tenants are party to the wrongdoing, the manager, in their eyes, and other people who hear what he's done, is going to come out of this smelling of roses, isn't he? After all, he's not taking it on the take, is he? He's not saying, well, you reduce it by 50% and give me 10%. He's not on the take. He just says, you reduce it. Good guy. Big tick. And we need to note the impact of what the manager has done. As I've said, he will undoubtedly get some credit for conveying the good news. But what's equally important is that the owner also will be praised as a generous landlord for having such big reductions. And there's the cleverness of what's happened. The manager has put the owner in a bind. If the owner says that the new rates don't apply, he will appear stingy and perhaps even dishonourable. He doesn't even honour what he said. Or he can say nothing, in which case the estate manager's got away with one. And that's the point. It's important to remember how the owner treated the manager with a degree of mercy. And the manager has gambled on that. He's let me off slightly. Maybe he'll let me off if I do this as well. That's the gamble. And we'll come back to that in a moment. So there's the first thing. As we dig into the parable a bit, we see there's some stuff going on here that's not obvious on the surface. But secondly, let's compare this parable with the parable of the 2 prodigals. Notice it's the prodigals, because both these sons, as I'm sure Chris said last week, are lost, the younger and the older together. But there are strong similarities with these parables. For a start off, both the manager and the younger son betray a deep trust. And the younger son, along with the manager, as we've seen, don't offer excuses for what they've done. And they both waste possessions. It's the same words that's used for them. They both scatter the goods that they're running. And we listen to the inner thoughts of both manager and younger son as they face up to the mess they're in. And like the younger prodigal son, the manager throws himself on the mercy of another. Finally, and crucially, both manager and son receive incredible mercy. The son from his father, the manager from the owner. So there's something in that that's helpful to see whether we're understanding this correctly. Next and finally, the parable compared to other parables. It's worth noting that some of Jesus' other parables include unsavory characters. The unjust judge, the lazy friend at midnight. And in each case, these characters are used to make one simple point about God. In the judge's case, where he's corrupt and he won't be bothered and so on, the message is, how much more will God be just? In the lazy friend's case, who can't be bothered to get up to help his friend, the message is, how much more will God listen to us when we cry out in need? And our parable has a similar straightforward point. How much more will God show mercy than the rich landowner? That's the point. Let me explain it a little bit more. When we become Christians, we know that God has shown incredible mercy to us to forgive our sins and make us new people. And we know that the same mercy of God will keep us going all the way to heaven. That's what Jesus is saying in verse 8. The people of light, Christians, have a heavenly future. So learn, he says, from the way unbelievers take care of things on earth and prepare just as carefully for heaven. That starts by relying on God's ongoing mercy. We don't just experience mercy at the beginning of the Christian life, we experience it throughout the Christian life, all the way to heaven. The manager is sensitive to the hopelessness of his situation, and he is aware of the one source of salvation, namely the generosity of his master. This clever rascal banks everything on that. And we Christians know God has already shown us immense mercy, and we also know that we can rely on God completely to show that same mercy to us throughout our lives, and finally in our eternal future. And just in case we still think Jesus is commending the manager's dishonesty, one preacher has summed this up very helpfully. He says, Jesus is not praising his integrity, but his ingenuity. His shrewdness. That's the point. That's what we need to learn. So children, here we go. Listen up now and watch up. There is a picture of what? Straightforward. What is it? Roops? A road. Well done. Excellent. It's a road. And roads tend to go somewhere, don't they? And Jesus tells us that our lives are on a journey. We're traveling to meet God one day. And so we need, listen up children, we need to make sure we're ready for that meeting. And we need to never forget that meeting. It's coming. So at school, work hard, but don't forget God. In your sports, enjoy yourselves, really go for it, but don't forget God. And with your friends, have a great time, but don't forget God. That's the point. This then is a parable that's hard to understand, it seems, and hopefully it's clearer now. Hopefully. You can tell me afterwards whether it is. Okay. So we now move to the second parable, a parable that's easy to misunderstand from 9 to 31. I want to suggest to you that verses 9 through to 18 are an introduction to the second parable. Okay? And it's all, he says, to do with money. and the things that having lots of money enable us to buy. We'll see why Jesus goes here in a minute, but for now, let's just see how he sets the parable up. The parable, as I said, which I think is easy to misunderstand. Notice he has a new audience, verse 14. It's the Pharisees. And his pre-parable teaching makes one simple point using two statements. Here's the first of them. Hopefully come up on the slide, great. Use worldly wealth well. Verse 9. I tell you, he says, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it's gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Notice it's interesting how he describes money as worldly. That's probably because it focuses our eyes on this world through the things we can buy with it. Jesus says that rather than in relying on money, we need to put that money to good use. So, invest in God's kingdom and godly relationships, and you'll be showing, he says, where your heart truly lies. To know God and be generous is better than knowing the value of the pound and risking spiritual bankruptcy. So that's the first thing he says by way of preparation for the parable of rich man and Lazarus. Second thing he says, have that up please, thank you, there's something more valuable than worldly wealth, verses 10 to 12. In God's scheme of things, worldly wealth is in fact actually something quite small. What's so much better, see how Jesus calls it, verse 11, true riches, is God's kingdom. Says Jesus, if you can't handle money well, then how on earth can you be trusted with the gospel, with the kingdom message? But he hasn't finished. He carries on. Our lives are God's gift to us. As such, they belong to him. Verse 12. Do you seriously think, says Jesus, that if we use our lives on ourselves instead of for God and others, that we're in the kingdom? Do you seriously think that's what's going on? I take it the life Jesus has in mind here is the life that we invest our money in. It's not only our lives, but our wealth that is a gift from God. Wealth is a trust from God to be used not for ourselves, but for the benefit of other people, is the point he's making. Which leads to the grand conclusion in verse 13, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Notice how the money is capitalized. We'll come back to why that is in a moment. So Jesus couldn't be clearer, could he? To put your trust in money is incompatible, doesn't just work, can't go alongside putting your trust in God. One writer says this, one always serves something. It had better be God, not the things of creation. You can't serve two masters. Now, you can tell that I'm slightly old. I'm old enough to remember Bob Dylan when he started. And he's got a good song. I don't know whether I put the words up or not. I think I did. Here we go. Oh, no. We'll just hold that for a second. Go back when it wouldn't clung to. Here's a song called You Gotta Serve Somebody. And he says this. You're going to have to serve somebody. I won't try and do his voice, by the way. Yes, indeed. You're going to have to serve somebody. Well, it may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. Dylan's got it right. He understands what Jesus is saying here. We all serve somebody. Maybe ourselves, but we serve. We live for, in other words, ourselves. And we now see the Pharisees' response to all this, and it is telling. Despite their certainty that they were the great godly examples for everyone else, Jesus has exposed their grubby hearts. Notice verse 14, they love money. So when Jesus says this, in preparation for the parable that's coming, they sneer at him. Literally, it says they turn their noses up at him. As one preacher says, Christ has touched a raw nerve of their lives. Beneath all their religious veneer, they love money. And so Jesus now speaks to them directly. Basically, he declares that they are in a bad way. What they value, he says, is in fact detestable. Literally, it stinks. These men think they're safely inside God's kingdom, verse 15, and essentially they're proud about it, something that God hates, but they're badly mistaken because God sees their hearts. The reality, he says, is that the era of law and prophets, which is a way of summarizing the Old Testament, is over, because the one that those things pointed to, Jesus, has come, and the offer of the kingdom is now open to all. Some are responding enthusiastically, he says, almost like verse 16, forcing their way in. They're so keen. And the implicit challenge for these religious leaders is not to ignore the invitation. They may think that they can take or leave Jesus' teaching, but actually the teaching will take or leave them. But to avoid doubt, Jesus shows that it's not that the law is irrelevant. It may be fulfilled, but its standards still apply. In fact, they more than apply, he ups them. So in verse 17, he says, let me show you. Anyone seeking to get rid of their wife in order to marry someone else, which was allowable by the Pharisees in their understanding of the law, anyone that thinks like that is wrong. And actually, they're more than wrong. They commit adultery. That's how high the standard is. Such behavior, he says, is detestable. Remember, it stinks before God. So, let's try and summarize what's going on. We're going to come back to this quote, but let me just read it to you now. If during our time on earth we pursue luxury for ourselves instead of love for others, then earth will be the extent of our heaven, and eternity will be our hell. The way you use your money shows whether your heart has been changed, so that love for others and not luxury for yourselves is what you long for and delight in. We're going to come back to that quote in a moment. So let's move on now, please, to the next heading. Oh no, sorry, not the big picture. Go back, please. Sorry, thank you. There we go. Let's stay with that. So we now move to a well-known parable, the story of the rich man, sometimes known as Dives, although he hasn't got a name, and Lazarus. Simple enough, straightforward enough, isn't it? Rich man spends his riches looking after himself, whilst at his gate a poor beggar sits starving every day. Eventually they both die. Poor beggar goes to heaven, rich man to hell. What's not to understand? Very simple, very straightforward. Some would say the moral of the story is rich people go to hell, poor people go to heaven. There you are. Couldn't be clearer. Jesus is, in fact, endorsing an early form of communism, where everything's the same. There are no riches. Rich and poor people are all the same. Easy enough lesson. Especially he's talking about wealth. He set it up nicely, hasn't he? He talked about wealth and mammon and all that stuff. Completely wrong, as you would imagine. Completely wrong. It's not what he's saying, although it appears to be what he's saying. So let's again dig a little bit more and see what's going on. First of all, let's think about the rich man and what we're told and what we're not told. There's nothing here to suggest he'd got rich dishonestly, or that richness as such is wrong. What we are told is that the rich man's life doesn't add up to much. We could summarize it like this. He wore, verse 19, the latest designer clothes, even down to his monogrammed underwear. That's the linen that his underwear is referring to. He lived life indulgently. Noticed every day was party time for this guy. So no Sabbath rest, notice, either for him or his servants. His property was comparable to the best mansions. The word for gate is a sort of gigantic portico or entrance you get to a temple or a palace, in verse 20. So in sum, he wanted to flash his money around. He wanted everybody to know he'd got it and he'd made it. And then verse 22, he dies. What is just as important is what is missing. There is no mention of any true relationships. This rich man is a faceless billionaire who nobody seems to have mourned. That's because he had no care or even concern for the poor beggar lying by his gate. And from verse 24, he calls him Lazarus. So he knew the guy's name. He knew he was there, but he completely ignores his desperate plight. His is, in the words of one writer, a heartless, cruel, and knowing neglect. There's the rich man. Let's move on to the poor man. Crucially, he has a name. Interestingly, the only named character in all of Jesus' parables. That should tell us a story. And the name Lazarus literally means, my God helps. This is telling. Lazarus' name tells us that he relied on God to help him. His trials have bred not resentment or self-pity, but faith. And what trials they were. He's laid at the gate, so he's probably too crippled to walk or too weak. Literally, the word is he's thrown down, verse 20, at the gate. He is hungry and disease-ridden, verses 20 to 21. And the food liberally scattered on the floor around the rich man's table caused him to salivate with hunger. If he could have had that, he'd have been happy. And the dogs took pity on him, verse 21, by cleaning his sores, licking them clean. Desperate straits. But after death, there's a great reversal. The poor man is happily with Abraham in heaven. The rich man is tormented in hell. And now we see more about the rich man, because he cries out for mercy, the mercy that he'd never given to Lazarus. He'd not given any aid to him, but now he asks Lazarus to give him some aid. And just stop and think, that is extraordinary, isn't it? There's no apology for his appalling treatment of Lazarus. He continues to treat him, in fact, as a servant. This man seems oblivious to the way he has ignored Lazarus. Talk about entitled. And equally remarkable is Lazarus' response. He says nothing by way of attack or complaint towards the rich man. He has no long-cherished reservoir of anger ready to explode at the first opportunity. Tells us a lot about the characters, doesn't it? Their after estate, so to speak, reveals what we've seen in their before-death estate. And Abraham gently reminds the rich man of all he'd enjoyed on earth, with the implicit statement, the problem is, you never shared those good things with anybody else. Sometimes, if you've been around church for a little while, you may hear Christians talk about sins of omission. There are sins of commission, things you do that you shouldn't. Sins of omission are things that you don't do that you should. And that's what's going on here. It's not for the bad things he's done that the rich man ends up in hell, but for the good he failed to do Lazarus. Let's put that quote back up now, Chloe, because this is what's going on. This sums it up. If during our time on earth, we pursue luxury for ourselves instead of love for others, then earth will be the extent of our heaven, and eternity will be our hell. The way you use your money shows whether your heart has been changed so that love for others and not luxury for yourselves is what you long for and delight in. That preacher has got it exactly right. He's nailed this story. But we carry on with the story. We haven't quite finished. The rich man then pleads for some special miracle to make his brother sit up and listen, ironically pointing forward to Jesus' resurrection, but we don't have time to dig into that. But clearly, he wishes he'd listened. But the telling words of Abraham are, verse 31, if they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced even if someone rises from the dead, which is exactly what happens with him and the Pharisees, isn't it? They try and cover it up when it happens. They try and do the same with the man Lazarus in John 11. They cover it up. They don't give in and go, this is an extraordinary miracle, because their hearts are so hard. And the point is simple enough, and it applies to us today. If we cannot hear God's voice, we won't see his hands at work. That's the message. So we come to our slightly sneaky third heading, but isn't quite. It's just a summary now of what's going on. The title of this message is You Cannot Serve Two Masters. And these two parables directly teach this. The first is an encouragement to focus on God's goodness, the astounding mercy of God. I don't know about you, but even in retirement, I wish I could just slow down a bit and think about the mercy of God, because then I might be shocked a bit more than I am. God, our Creator, God who sustains our lives one breath at a time. You breathe a breath that's given you by God right now. God who is our great rescuer through Christ. That God has shown us mercy. And our best of hymns and songs celebrate it. It's a lovely 17th century hymn which begins, "Oh, how the grace of God amazes me." Or think of John Newton's famous one, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." Or think of one we sing here, "I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene and wonder how he could love me, a sinner, condemned, unclean. How marvelous, how wonderful." And my song should ever be, how marvelous, how wonderful is my Saviour's love for me. Instead of rounding on us and demanding a reckoning for our sin, which would be fully justified, this God shows us daily mercy, and he will be until the day he calls us home. That's the message of the first parable. And the second is a warning. No matter how respectable we may be, or how regularly we attend church, or how well thumbed our Bibles, we cannot serve two masters. The fate of the rich man is sobering, isn't it? Even though it's a parable and we shouldn't push the details too hard, he is trapped in hell, isn't he? I mean, there's no escape. After death, our eternal future is not fluid, it's fixed. If we choose to invest our energies and focus on this life, then there will be a reckoning in the life to come, says Jesus. Which reminds me, what was I doing? Oh, James, have you got something I lent you? Can I have it back, please? I think it's, not that I don't trust you, but thank you very much. It's very good of you. Thank you. Well done. Thank you. Phew, I'd get in trouble if I lost that. I haven't got a pocket. Well, I'm going to have to stay there. So, children, this was given to James to look after for me. I entrusted it to him. It's mine, but I said, you take care of it, will you please? And here we go. Let's look at the next slide, please. We've got one coming up. Nope. Oh, that's it then. Well, that's great, isn't it? Okay. Well done. Very good. You'll just have to listen to my voice now. Okay. God gives us our lives as a gift. He entrusts them to us. So he expects us to use them well. That's the point. Your life is a gift. It's not random. He's given you life, and he says, use it well. Use it well. I've entrusted it to you. That's very, very important. So remember that, children. Your lives are going somewhere to meet God, so use them well. Invest them well. And it's no different, is it, for those of us here who are adults? Remember, verse 13, no one can serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and money, capital M for money. That's because so much of our lives are bound up with this stuff. Want a good education? Well, why? So you can get a good job. Well, why? Well, so you can earn lots of money. You can buy a nice house. Go on nice holidays. Get a good pension. We're talking my age now, you see where we're going. Okay. enough savings apparently to cruise around the world all the days of your life, if you so wish. I remember talking to a retired head teacher. Not all head teachers are like this, I hasten to add, but she was talking about her pension. She said, Ian, I could go on a cruise every week of the year and still have sufficient money. She wasn't boasting, she was a Christian, but she had a big pension. And that's what we're told we want, isn't it? Big pensions. Then we can do what we like. Or we can maybe invest it so that we, have nice last days towards the end. Can you see how without control, mammon will blind us to God and eventually replace him in our lives? It can be hard to resist. That's why we have both these parables together. So here's the vital question, isn't it? The one to really end on. Thank you for listening so patiently. With a God of such mercy, why would we want to serve a lesser master like Mammon? Why would you want to invest your life in that? You've got this. Do you see? Let's pray, shall we? We thank you, Father, that you are a God of such amazing mercy. Please help us every day, busy though we may be, with the various callings you place upon us. Help us not to forget your mercy every day of our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.